Very, very welcome everyone who's already joined us and who's joining us still in the session. So today I'm super delighted to have Juan with us. So Juan is a Peruvian design researcher, and he specializes in Latin American critical studies in design, systemic design approaches, and also design philosophy and theory of knowledge methodology. So Juan is going to talk us through his work today, and he's got everything laid out in a presentation which he's opening up in a second. So I won't say that much more, and I'll just hand over to Juan. Welcome.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Derek, and everyone at the ETSIC for this kind invitation. And I'm just happy to be here with you. I only know a few of you, and that's exciting. So I would like to share what I prepare for this presentation, which I hope won't take, maybe take half of our time, so we can also have time to hear your thoughts and maybe have a conversation, which is really something I'm looking for. Let's see. Let me know if everything is looking good. I think so. Yeah, great. All right. All right, so this presentation is called To Design and to Transem, New Ontological Possibilities from Latin America for a Practice Beyond Design and Academia. And what I will be sharing also closely relates to discussions we are having at the Critical Studies of Latin American Design Society that engages many people from Latin America, but not only Latin Americans, but people interested in what's happening in Latin America nowadays in relation to critical discussion of how to approach design and how to think beyond design. And in this case, I'm bringing a bit of that in this presentation, so we can have an interesting conversation afterwards. So I'm starting from some basics here, just to set the theoretical framework of this presentation. I'm sure you're already familiar with this idea of the ontological relationality between design and society, ontological design, how designers and design shapes and is being shaped by society, cultural identity. So what I'm be sharing here in this presentation is how I'm moving from this initial framework to this framework of transcultural systemic relations and ways to think design also in terms of cultural territory, and how there are other modes of relationality that are parallel to design that comes from different cultural backgrounds and settings, and how design relates and talks and dialogues with these other practices. So this is actually what's almost at the end of my presentation. I'm just bringing it up so you have an idea of where are we going towards, and I'm going to be building towards this general vision. So let's go into that. Here I will start with the general setting of design through this cultural or intercultural lens. So when we think also as design as a practice and way of thinking that has a cultural background and inheritance. So we could say that most of the perspectives currently comes from a modern Western view of design, and that also is a process of modernization or expansion, how design through this lens is also sharing thoughts and engaging with other parts of the world and territories and ways of doing and thinking and feeling also. So then I am adding a little bit of additional concepts. This particular concept of diprem or diprema, as we know it in Spanish, comes from a close friend of mine, a Colombian design researcher called Alfredo Gutierrez Borrero. So diprems will be these other forms of disposition, prefiguration, and materialization. So basically, a way to acknowledge that there are other practices in the territories, in this case, in Latin America, more specifically in Peru, that are parallel to design. So then some issues that emerge in this perhaps confusion of the language is that if we see this practice, for instance, in the upper right corner, it's usually called this kene design or kene art. And then there's where the confusion starts to emerge, because as we see it, since it looks a bit similar to perhaps graphic design, we think of it as also design. But then the issue is that maybe when we think of it in that way, we are actually losing the actual background or a structure of knowledge, epistemology, where this practice emerges. So part of the intention of using a different term, in this case, diprem or diprema, is a way to remind us that this is not actually design, but actually a different practice with which design could relate with, dialogue, exchange knowledge. This can be also both ways, both how perhaps a kene, which would be something that we call a modern, a Masonic diprem, could relate to the Western modern design. And then in the Andean area, especially in the southern part of Peru, and engaging also with Bolivia, part of Chile, we can also think of Uyuania. It's also different practice that I'm engaging heavily on my current research in systemic design approaches to the territory, which also is not design, but it's something different. It's Uyuania. So this is the case for the Aymara people. So an additional layer of complexity that these thoughts and researchers bring into the table is also the enrichedness of language. So when we start not translating, but actually thinking of these terms in original languages, it allows to think that these actually are something different. Maybe in the case of Kene, it's allowing us to think that this is maybe even closer to philosophy as a practice of reflection, ways of thinking. What are we as humans in relation to the context and environment and the planet and so on and so forth? So yeah, it's really opening many possibilities of thinking. So thanks to Alfredo for these interesting concepts so far, and I'm continue to build upon these layers. Then another design researcher, Daniel Opera Molano, also a Colombian colleague, he then contributed with this interesting thought of specular dialogues or diálogos especulares. So then, if we acknowledge there are other practices that are alternative to design, how can we think of ways to better understand these practices? And then he shows this challenge that we have that is called the effect of the specular dialogue, which means that when we try to make sense of a different practice that is outside of our epistemological understanding, what we usually as humans do is we project our own terminology and systems to make sense of what we're looking. And that's natural. That's not a problem with that. But then if we acknowledge that maybe what we are looking at is not the actual thing, but the understanding that it's also a reflection of our own concepts, in the sense of Kene being something different to Kene design, then we can think of that if we actually want to understand what is beyond our reflection, then we can think of ways of engaging with this different knowledge and also going even beyond language, finding ways of going beyond translation, always asking, yes, so this is the translated version in English or Spanish, in the context of Latin America, for instance, or Portuguese. But then the question is, but actually, what do you mean when you say this is, I don't know, like I used to make this example of how Raini, which is concept in Quechua, means like a party in Spanish, like fiesta. But then actually the meaning of it is completely different to the Western initial understanding of that. So then when we ask, but actually, what do you mean with that? Then kind of like I added this image from Satoshi Kon Paprika, trying to break this mirror that is our own illusion of understanding and trying to go beyond that. And we need the collaboration in order to do that. So specular dialogues helps acknowledging that we need to collaborate more interculturally to actually understand each other. So yeah, the image in the top is this idea of the reflection. How can we go beyond this reflection, right? All right, so let's keep adding more. I'm just throwing to you guys some concepts. I hope I'm explaining myself so far. And then it comes this next concept that also is helping us understanding this complexity, which is equialtervalence. This is also a concept that emerged from the conversation between Alfredo Gutiérrez Borrero, this Colombian design researcher, and Alejandro Aber, Argentinian archaeologist. That is, well, in English could be like equialtervalence, which is equialtervalentes, meaning a similar but different understanding of its value. So then also helps us think that then design, or when design is the other, there are many equialtervalence to design, which could be these practices of Kene, or Uiwania, that are equialtervalence. They look similar, but they are fundamentally different. And this also, even in the context of, for those of you who are familiar with these developments in the pluriversal design perspectives, it's also in the context of Latin America, allowing for an interesting debate and discussion that how much of the pluriverse, understood as this multi, because when we say a world, or we think of planet Earth, there's again Earth and Terra, or in geography and geo and Gaia, also tells us a bit of the cultural perspectives that we're using to understand even these complexities of many worlds. And then this question is, so what other words are equivalents to world? And there is the Pacha, for instance, which is the understanding from the Quechua of the idea of the planet where we live in, or Ao for the Marie, or Kenyawita for the nations in what we call now North America. So even the wording is interesting to discuss and even expand in these inter and transcultural dialogues. So and then I bring in an example of how exciting is this. So for instance, and this also, I mean, kind of like puts design in an interesting dialogue with different ways of reasoning and understanding and thinking. So for instance, for the Quechua, a nation, a community that expands through many countries in Latin America, the future is conceptualized as being at our backs, not in front of us. So actually, this also engages in an interesting way with the idea of designers thinking or looking towards the future, or designing for futures, or even in the context of this presentation, the futures of even design education. So the idea of the future is an interesting concept that can also be put into this discussion. And so I was thinking, how can I explain in an easy way how, for the Quechua, the future is not in front, and we're not walking towards the future, but actually it's in our backs. What does that mean? How can we make sense of that? So I thought of this image here in the right, which we can think of if we are in a boat and we are actually looking at the backwards of the boat. So for the Quechua people, we cannot see the future in a direct sense, as we don't have like this magical crystal sphere that we can actually see the future. But actually the future comes to us. And what we do is we make predictions of where we are going towards based on the traces of the present becoming the past, in the way that if we are in a boat, we try to make predictions of where the boat is going towards based on the trace in the water it leaves. So the traces that are present and quickly become in the past, kind of like is that way actually humans think of the future based on the data and evidence that we have in the present. And in a sense, well, actually these making contributions in the present that then perhaps change a little bit of the track of this, the way we as a society are going. And this is actually quite a wise way of thinking, because it removes a bit of the illusion of that we're actually being able to see this where we're going, but rather kind of like position us in a way that there's always this level of unpredictability and uncertainty inherent to what we do, in a way that we can make many plans and then suddenly, you know, this pandemic, for instance, appeared out of quote unquote nowhere. So there are many uncertainties as part of the actual process. So there's these interesting exchanges of perspectives towards futures and how design engages with futures. And so we can also think through these lenses that we are not actually looking directly into the future, but the future cannot be seen by us humans. But we only trace signals from the past to interpret what it's about to come. And so we actually see this in different ways in different practices, and especially in relation to risk and risk assessment and the unpredictability of risk. This is an interesting book that just came out a few years ago, The Era of Global Risk, an introduction to existential risk studies. So these ideas of how we base our decision making on the data we have available, which is actually present and past, to make some predictions towards the future, which also makes us think how many information we have available about the geological stages of the planet. So in terms of the planetary timeline, how many information do we actually have available to make predictions? It's an interesting question in this context. So then, going back to the framework I was showing you before, I'm going to start sharing now how my own research engages with these previous concepts and dialogues with these intercultural and transcultural discussions. So then I'm also introducing this concept of Transems and the logic of why it might be useful also to think of this particular concept in relation with designs and deprems. So if we understand there is a practice that we know as design, and then there are other potential practices that are equialtervalent, like Kene and Uiwania, actually that's even not enough to understand what we see in the actual territories that we engage with. Because when, for instance, a designer, an individual was formed in a university in Latin America and recognizes himself or themselves as designers, engages with practices in the territory, it doesn't necessarily mean that what we are going to be seeing is only a deprem, like a completely different practice. But actually what we're going to be seeing most of the times is already this mixture of practices that results already a transculturality. So in order to visualize that, is that I thought of these additional processes of transculturalization, which are the Transems. So the idea is that if there is, let's say, like, no, instead of thinking of A, B, or black or white, we can actually think of a spectrum of grays, of different layers, of levels of already interrationality from a transcultural perspective. So Transem then means transculturalization of semantics and materialization. Semantics in the sense of what the meaning is there and how this meaning materializes in different ways. So that's actually helping us not only recognize that the practices that we see might be closer or farther from different points of cultural emanation, but also even in Latin America to think that what we usually call design and what we learn in Latin American universities is already a layer of Transem, because it's not completely the same as it's taught in, I don't know, in Germany or in Europe or North America and other parts, but already has some layers of interculturality in it. And then something that is quite fascinating to me is this additional idea that is the cultural diversification. So even beyond what we can see, particularly the ones who have some layers of, or we speak, if we think of this in terms of language, if we speak Western language, then we can also think or imagine that there are even practices that are of transculturality that is happening between different cultures that does not mediate or is not mediated through Western understandings or perspectives or views. But then the problem, no, I don't know if the problem, but then the characteristic of this is that at the moment we engage with that, then it stops being external, different dynamics, but then also engages with Western design. So usually this is interesting because when there are design projects in the context of these transcultural territories, usually there's already a layer of modernity and modernization happening there. Then we do have to acknowledge, because if we are able even to communicate, and the person we're talking with is bilingual and is already translating, let's say, from Shipibo-Conibo to Spanish, or Aymara or Quechua to Spanish, then there's already this interesting layer of saying, okay, but actually, beyond the translation in Spanish and bringing the idea, the concept into the Spanish or Spanish understanding and world, can you tell me a little bit more of what Kene actually means to you, and how then we can think how different or similar it is to what we know in design as maybe graphic design and so on. So it's already really opening a more complex way of understanding what's happening in the territories that engage with different cultural epistemologies. So then, this is my main contribution in relation to this stream of thinking and concepts that are emerging from the critical studies in Latin American design research, that adds this additional layer of how we can think also even beyond or design and depends to transcend, and this idea of transcultural semantics and materiality. So how to trans-semanticize, how to give meaning, and a meaning that is built through the understanding of different epistemologies and structures of knowledge, and then how we can think of ways of materialize that reflects that actual transversality in the way we're trying to understand each other, and in the process of doing that, enrich our lexicon, enrich our vocabulary, enrich the so to speak, like the library of knowledge that we have at our disposal to think of what we do as a practice in relation to design or other practices that are out there. Yeah. So then, just to finalize with this introduction of concepts that we are discussing, I would like to introduce one last concept that I'm currently thinking a lot about, and this is the idea of internationality or internationalization, the idea of everything international. And I realize through this lens that even the concept or the word international or internationality is a bit limiting, particularly when we think that it's not the same even to say that different countries have different cultural views, but even to think, for instance, of intercontinentality maybe helps us think that it's not exactly the same when we even engage with these Latin American discussions with other things that are happening in different parts of the world. And intercontinentality, from my perspective, opens up the possibility to have these interesting conversations that could engage with how these are being discussed, or these aspects of transculturality are being discussed in relation to design in places like Asia or Africa or India, Middle East, I don't know, in Europe as well, and North America. I think this could open also the possibilities to engage in a more enriching way. And just to finish with that, also, it's not only about how this could help or maybe establish conversations in the context of Peru or Latin America, as I said, acknowledging, right, that there is other practices in these territories. But I also was thinking, because I'm currently also engaging with Lancaster University and PUC Peru, which these two universities I'm affiliated with, and also with Socionatural, which is a research center I created also to engage directly with the discussions in this transcultural approach, that we can think of these different forms of knowledge that exist in Latin America, but at the same time, different forms of knowledge that exist in the UK. So how we can even trace knowledge that is not only modern Western perspectives, but even a-modern Western difference. So local knowledge, ancient knowledge that also can inform, enrich our current contemporary practices in the UK, for instance. Then how that could also help engaging with other parts of the world in this enrichness of our understanding of what design is and how it relates to other practices. All right, so thank you everyone for this space to share some of my current research. And I'm of course happy to hear your thoughts, hear your questions, maybe clarify or make some deepen some aspects that you might find particularly interesting, and then of course continue the conversation maybe in LinkedIn or email as you see fit. Thank you. Oh,
Thank you. You're a bit dark now.
Yeah,
that's okay. We can still just see you.
Yeah.
That was really amazing. It really reminded me of some research I've engaged long time ago now with. It's really interesting about the surface translation and the deep translation. I don't know if you probably know this culture pyramid, where the surface kind of how things look and then how things behave are on the top, and the middle layer and the values and the underlying things are on the bottom, and what you translate, whether it's the surface kind of and how you understand it. But for you, I think it goes even further in the sense, how things are then named and what you are able to translate, if you only see like a naming. And in that respect was really interesting. And you said like how, the methods of how you translate. And you said a lot about collaboration and working together. And I have a very similar experience there, I was very fortunate to be in Japan on a summer school where this exactly happened. It was so interesting. It was an international summer school, lots of design research, design students. And they worked together and some phenomena that we really try to understand in the local context. For example, why are there gaps between the buildings, and the discussions we had around that this is really important to show kind of respect for boundaries and an understanding which goes through other values, cultural values, right, in a sense. So this is an externalization in an architecture, but it actually is an underlying value the society holds, to have a gap, to leave space, to show respect. And I find that fascinating. So I've seen this in different places, and I wonder what you think about. Maybe you can expand a bit more about the how to, how this translation could happen. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, wonderful. So so far, this particular method that we are exploring and putting into practice, which is the specular dialogues, is because the interesting thing is so far is not so much about the actual decision making, but how we reach to that point and which framework we are using to reach to that decision making process. So these concepts, for instance, the Transem or different, is just not as I don't know, like for instance, it's not a change of practice. Actually, it's more about a change of the lens that we are using to the same practice. So it's just making more visible that perhaps when we engage with these other cultural perspectives, then we could think that what we are doing as a decision-making process is also trying to understand each other first, and the concept and the language, which then will make the framework from where we actually do that decision-making thing. So it's just to try to visualize, or maybe make more visible that there is this important previous stage of trying to understand each other, thinking beyond translation, and actually, engaging in more meaningful and deeper ways in transculturality, in a transcultural and intercultural way. Yeah. Yeah. And also, just to add to that, then the result from that, I think it's also important to value it as Yeah, this is interesting. There's interesting discussions of how much of what we see is is there something that we call also, for instance, Japanese design, or what we are seeing is also ideally a transcultural new form of practice that might be interesting to think of. How can we expand our language to recognize how much of it is comes from the West, how much of it comes from Japan, and maybe also in the particular context of Peru, what this is allowing us is also to acknowledge how much of these layers of different cultural perspectives are there, not only from the West and the local knowledge, but also Asian influence that came like 200 years ago, and then also African practices and knowledge and meaning that have been not visualized or acknowledged before. So this is kind of really interesting times, like expanding our understanding of things that were really common to us. We thought we understood them, but then now at a lot of layers of meaning that before were not there for us to see, or we couldn't see them, better say. Yeah.
That's right. Thank you. Yes. Derek, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thank you very much, Juan. That was really interesting. I wonder if I could maybe pull it back to education.
Oh, yeah.
So what you were describing, Nick, in some sense, that's a really interesting observation. But I think what Juan is maybe also describing is that it's not just looking at that observation. It's like, as you say, it's like going to the bottom of the iceberg and then recognizing, no, what you actually need to understand is that it's floating in an ocean. So it's like you're almost suggesting, Juan, correct me if I'm wrong, that you almost need to try, that's maybe too active. It's almost like you need to almost engage with the worldviews, the belief systems, or the systems of thinking that led to the space between the buildings to emerge. Not that there is a space between buildings, but it's actually what prefigures that. What's the thing that kind of, what's the dispositions and attitudes, and how might that, I guess, inform you as a designer? So I guess the question in terms of education is to do that. And this is the other interesting thing that you notice. It's almost like the modern thing. It's almost, you need to, the most important curriculum to decolonize is the one that is the colonizer in some senses. You need something to start with, I guess, to then say, I've now got enough stuff so that I can maybe go out and have other experiences that might exist in other places. And that can be really difficult if you're starting from a curriculum that does already think of itself as internationalist, as complete, as archetypal, as universal. So I guess the question is, how do you address that as a problematic in a context that is like already a challenge already? I guess
that's a beautiful question. That's a beautiful question. Thank you for asking that. I can share my own experience doing that inside academia. So yeah, I'm a professor at the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru, which is based in Lima. It has a bit more than 100 years of existence as an institution. So yeah, for those who are in academia know that also the time means that it's even harder to make changes because there's a lot of layers of infrastructure, socio-technical infrastructure, physical, digital, and so on and so forth, that kind of like make it more rigid perhaps. So in my context, it does involve this layer of somewhat of activism, or even being conscious of the politics of the narratives that we present when we say we are academics, we are researchers, and so on and so forth. The idea, starting from the idea that knowledge only exists inside of the universities. And so starting from that place, I make this argument among my colleagues and so on within my institution, that we have to acknowledge that there is a lot of wealth of knowledge that does not exist or is not even imagined within the universities. So that allowed me to actually create a course, a module. I don't know what's the term you use, I'm sorry. This is also aspects of translation is. That was called Critical Studies of Latin American Design, and had this intention of using the module or course as a way to actually engage deeply with community. So how to engage with the people actually in the territory. It does not create this bubble of illusion of we are actually talking about society, but society is not there with us. It's only us, professors and students, talking about it. So that for me was quite obvious, but then resulted to be quite a challenge for my university to grasp that idea of possibility, because then comes questions of, so what do you mean that this space is so open to others to engage and come to the classroom? So they are students. If they are students, they have to pay their tuition. If they are not students, why are they there? But then it's like, so I have to make a lot of arguments to say that actually their presence is what enriches the purpose of the module or the course. Without their presence, it's just Peruvians, a bunch of Peruvians talking about Peru, even from a perspective that is Lima, and Lima is not Peru, and it's even less Latin America. So I had to do a lot of negotiation, a lot of power relationships, a lot of understanding also how my university works and things, and making middle points of agreement where I could also have the possibility to bring other individuals, not only professors or design researchers, but also people from the Quechua, people from Aymara knowledge, and people from the Mapuche nations, and so on, to also participate in this space that was searching for ways to expand what we understand of what we do, and how we think of Latin America, how we think of what we do in relation to Latin America. And thankfully, much of pushing towards that, not giving up, finally actually created an interesting phenomenon, which is that even though my university is still challenging or finding difficulties to insert this model inside their system, what actually happened is that then many other individuals in Latin America, even other parts of the world, found this space quite exciting. So where my university might not have initially found value, others found value, and through the community, actual international, intercontinental community, then my university started to understand where was the value on doing this. So then, yeah, it's interesting to think of what. You have to understand, I guess, where the value lies in different individuals and institutions. So through that lens, then my university is starting to open up much more to these ideas of having people share, not necessarily lecture, but just be there and share their experiences, and that definitely enriches so much more the teaching learning experience. Also helped a lot to my students to not have to think of society as something external to the university, but actually engage directly of what it means to be Latin American, what it means to be Peruvian, when you are directly exchanging knowledge with others in the territory. So I hope that example helped thinking how to do this.
Thank you. Yes, Benjamin, do you want to come in next, and then Nicholas? Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much also, Juan, for your presentation and the introduction of, to me, new, I'd say, vocabulary for phenomena, which, I initially connected also at a very small amount to my to translate also at the meso level between different people and understanding the different backgrounds. I can use the word design, but a lot of people think different things when they hear it. So translating or finding a way to communicate about the different, let's say, worldviews on this shared activity, worldwide shared activity, is a big thing, and I like having an idea of describing it better through your conceptualization of it. And my connection circles a bit back to what Nicole said, and maybe also connects with what Derek said, because I wanted to know if you could share a bit more if you have had different experience with how to facilitate this type of exchange. I'd say you said a bit on that in the educational context, but also have you had some? I'm curious if there was some experience if it needed, like I would say, more than words, because I don't know the method specular dialogue, so I can't really. Maybe it's already implied in this, but if you have to first. If we settle on the English language, then it's also a compromise, because every language can evoke so many more things in its own specialized. Did you have to, or did you find it useful to use other methods like visualizations or other performative aspects or something like this? Just curious if there were other aspects than like dialogue in English, trying to facilitate the Transem.
Great. That's great.
Long.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of activities that we are familiar with, there is, of course, the possibility of workshops. So we could think of the workshop as a space to rethink how we approach the design of a workshop or a decision-making workshop. So there are a few considerations when we have this engagement. And so I'm also, while I'm sharing this, I'm conscious of there definitely are differences between, for instance, the PUC Peru doing it with other communities from different cultural backgrounds in Peru, and then other university from other part of the world doing that also in Peru, for instance. So there's an important difference. But I think maybe one fundamental common aspect is when we acknowledge that then design is not the only practice, and that applies for both cases, then we also seek for other forms of actors or stakeholders that could also facilitate this process. So when we think for us design as the fundamental process of decision making, then we also helps think of these other deprems that exist out there that then might be in equivalent forms of institutionalities. What I'm trying to say here is what the university is in the Western world might be other form of social organization in the Quechua society or the Aymara society. And if we are conscious that that exists, then we can try to reach to those places and people and actors. So before there was this kind of short answer saying like, but there's no design institutions there, so we cannot actually engage with the people there because there are no who to engage with. But then the problem is that we're projecting the idea of a design that has to exist everywhere. But if when we acknowledge that there are other practices that are equivalent, similar but different, and with other languages, then we actually see that there are a lot of a population of institutions or organizations and people who can talk with us. And then the other layer is positionality. So then we have to acknowledge where we come from and what we know and what we think we don't know and what we would like to see could emerge through the dialogues and specular dialogues. So in the context of a workshop, this could mean, for instance, to actually write down the words. So we acknowledge that these words exist and have weight, and try to also use, and this is interesting because is to use the original word. So for instance, if we are engaging with the Shipibo Konibo people, then when we are willing to refer to their practice, then ideally I would use their own word, which is kene, and then that allows us to have the discussion of if I'm understanding it well, or maybe there are many other layers that I'm not knowing, and it helps to have this conversation. So these are kind of like, I think, some elements that I could share that could help anywhere through something that we already know as a workshop that could help establishing first this possibility of deeper understanding. And I guess that also helps how to then make decisions afterwards.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That makes really good sense. Thank you, Juan. Yeah, that was really good. So, Nicholas, can I go to you next, please?
Yeah. Hi. First, thanks, Juan, for the presentation, for the talk. I think there was a lot of like interesting and useful vocabulary there to think about this kind of context that like I know that both of like me and you, we are also kind of in this kind of similar situation of being Latin American, like being based partially, well, I mean, being based quite strongly in Europe, but also with connections. Like I myself am from Brazil, based in Malmö University. I'm thinking about like there was 3 things that came to my mind, but I'm thinking about this kind of the dialogues. You know, how do we create this? Or we could even talk about like dialogics between the context we are like in the global north now versus our homelands, and then this like traditional practices and indigenous knowledges. And listen to your talk, just to contextualize a little bit. I work a lot with the practice of capoeira, bringing it into to kind of redefine what design is from a perspective of that traditional knowledge here, both here and in Brazil, and so trying to create this kind of conversations between this practice and the design, the academic environment, but also this kind of between Sweden in this case and in Brazil. And I was thinking about three arguments that like when you were presenting. One is this idea of decentralizing design, where they argue that the role of decentralizing design is to make so that design is not seen as something that belongs to the North or to Europe, right? The second thing is Dori Tunstall's arguments that decolonizing design is the duty of the white European men because they were the ones who created the situation for colonization, right? And I mean, I think we see in decolonizing design a lot of like us Latin Americans and Africans and people not from the global North actually trying to do the work, or like, you know. Anyway. But then there is a third argument from Ailton Krenak, indigenous author, that he talks about heartful alliances. You know, how do we create heartful alliances to decolonize, to kind of move backwards, as you presented, towards maybe futures that don't replicate the kind of ugly traces of our boats, kind of in a way. So I'm thinking about that idea, especially if like in relation to design, since we are in a design academic environment in the global North, in connection to the global South. You know, how do we create these conversations in a way that also kind of I don't want to use the word change, but that opens up in both places and both opens up in between. I don't know if you're.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Nicolas. And it's nice to see you also here. Yes, that's a really interesting question because it touches upon some even different perspectives, also from Latin American design researchers in relation to decolonization, and also people who are here and there, and so on and so forth. So, in my opinion, in relation to the 3 elements that you mentioned, right? There's 3 arguments. Decentralizing design, yes, I agree with that. But then at the same time, there's this interesting idea of that maybe design is still not everywhere. And so it acknowledges that there are practices that design share with other cultural knowledge, and then there's other cultural practices that are just equivalent to even the Transems and the designs. And so then this is interesting because what I'm trying to say here with this also conversation with the arguments that you share is that this is an ongoing conversation as well, and we are starting to build this framework of understanding. Then the second point, decolonizing design is the duty of white male perspectives. So my perspective on that is that there's a risk of doing the same activity or the same action, but just on the other way around. So there's this tricky part where if for instance, from Latin American design perspectives, and also that's the reason why I think of Transems, because if we only think of deep prems, then it becomes this kind of like purism, like this idea of that there's actually a pure element that is stripped from any Western influence. And actually what we see in the territory in Latin America is this transculturality. The important thing there, I would say, is that to acknowledge that most of that process of transculturality has been through trauma, and that's definitely true. But then the way to move forward would be to find this possibility for coexistence, how to reconcile with the past from both sides. So this is a lot of back and forth. So and I think this is really important to how we are trying to build bridges, because we Latin Americans alone cannot do it. Western individuals alone cannot do it. It has to be done through engagement. It has to be done mixing Spanish, English, Portuguese, Quechua, Aymara, Shipibo Conibo, and so on and so forth. I think that's what I think it could be the way to actually achieve this. And so these concepts like Transems and so on and so forth, and trying to help maybe create the background or conceptual background in order to be able to do that. Yeah. And then hurtful alliances. You mean hurtful in the sense of like a heart, like corazón? All right. So you see that we have to use different languages, right? So yeah, I mean, that sounds great. That sounds great, because there's this idea, for instance, from Latin American territories of sentipensar, which could be something like a thinking, feeling. So you think at the same time that you feel at the same time as you think, you make sense through feeling, you feel through making sense rationally, and so on and so forth. So yeah, there's this layer of complexity, and there's other interesting concepts from a colleague of mine, Valentina Alcalde, the idea of, how do you call this? Incorporar, or like acuerpar. It's like you embody what you are doing. So this is really important, because then when you engage with these people, you have to be honest to yourself, right? And why you are doing it. So why are you there? What do you really want to do there with these people? And you have to be honest with that. And so the people will be also honest with you. And so this also speaks of this importance of not extractivist practices, of extracting knowledge with the purposes of publishing articles, but actually to think of what meaning is there, what value is there. So what I value is not something that they will value. So we have to then talk and search for something that will be also not only making sense in a logical level, but also making like heart sense, right? Because we're human at the end, right? Or at least that's what we're trying to achieve. So yeah, it's very challenging, but I agree totally. That's something we're trying to explore. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I love this think fields holistic approach, and then just adding on to this the embodiment, and think about what you do. That's exciting. It explodes my head. But Gwen,
thank you.
Can I come to you? Only 4 more minutes, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah,
but,
I don't really have a question, but more like a comment. And first of all, I wanted to thank you for this excellent talk. And what I was thinking is, when we talk about relationality and so on, it's maybe not. It's not only about the global South countries and Latin America, Africa, Asia, and so on, liberating themselves from the international design narrative. Maybe also Europe or the Western design understanding has to be decolonized in a way, because it came out of industrialization, and so we think in these industrial terms, but the design term has also expanded so much, so maybe we also need to think beyond it. So when you say to change the university, maybe in Latin America the university is it's a different format, maybe also in Europe the university needs to be a different format. So again, bring it back to education, because originally it was also a place for self-study. I think that was the original definition of a university, and now it's become more like this kind of degree machine or something like this. So maybe we also have to rethink it. So I think the whole discussion, it's not so much about trying to look at two sides and like who liberates itself from which side or something, but it's more really about maybe liberating everybody. And I mean, maybe it ties in with the question whether decolonization should be done from Europeans or so. Probably not. I mean, I've lived in the global South now for almost 20 years, and everybody, like my colleagues, friends, and so on, they all say, no, hold on. Like, first we were colonized, now we are told to decolonize. When can we decide ourselves what we want to do? So I think it's more about everybody moving forward and rethinking how we can diversify design knowledge. I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Wen. And I would like to add some thoughts on that line, because it's much more complex than just south or north, and this, of course, always these dualisms are binaries are
and labels also, all these labels
are reducing. And so from my perspective, what decolonization approaches would be is first a process of introspection, how oneself can also liberate their own minds, because there's a possibility to acknowledge. So I share a little bit, for instance, this idea of a modern Western difference, for instance, the idea of this ancient knowledge that's also in Europe, but not only ancient knowledge, but also local practices that usually are not acknowledged as practices that are important because are not taught in universities, but actually there's a huge amount of knowledge of the territory and different ways of practice. So this idea could be of just the possibility of expanding our minds for everyone before thinking of doing this for someone else, or thinking of doing this because you have to help someone else. First, we have to help ourselves liberate our minds, and that, I think, is for everyone. So I agree with that, definitely. And also, Latin America has its own challenges. That's also Latin Americans doing oppressive practices to Latin Americans themselves. So that's also maybe the case in contexts like Europe. So also, even the university perhaps doing practices that are oppressive to other forms of knowledge that also exist in a territory. So I think that we can share the ways we are engaging with this challenge and learn from each other. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was exciting. That was an exciting conversation. Thank you very much.
Yes, I agree. Unfortunately, we run out of time. But honestly, Juan, thank you so much. I have definitely got a few things to look up and read up on and think about again. Thank you so much. So the recording will be online soon, we promise. And the next event is going to be on the 14th of November. It's going to be Derek, you organised this. Andrew Whitcomb, Marcia and Ulysses. I don't know them. So do you want to quickly say something about that? Or
very, very quickly, from what little I know, we're still getting the details, but it's kind of a bit of a mini extension of what we've been talking about today. We all exist in institutional contexts, and I think Andrew and the team are going to be looking at what the presses or the pressures of those contexts actually do to our curriculum, how that actually shapes design. It's another invisible thing, another auto-colonization, if you want to think of it that way. So it should be an interesting one. It's also a bit experimental. They're hoping to get people who are interested in talking about these kind of matters together. So please come along if it sounds interesting at all. We'll post details and email everybody, as always, through Eventbrite. Sorry, that's all we've got just now. As soon as we possibly can, though.
That's fantastic. So that's the Eventbrite link just in the form, but I think most of you know anyway. Well, thank you so much. And if you have a little bit of time to stay, please stay on for an informal conversation, or if not, thanks so much and see you next time.